Jerry, can we get started?
We are good to go.
Ready to go.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the Law and Licensing Committee. I'm Chair Hymas. We have all 5 of us joining today. Member Lear and I are downtown. We have with us online Member Hart, Vice Chair Carey, and Member Wood. So we'll go ahead and get started. We have a couple of public commenters. So agenda item 2.1, public comment. Are we ready? And we'll invite Annie Massey to speak first. Annie, we'll ask you that you keep it clean and professional, of course, and we'll go for about 2 minutes as we have a full agenda today. So Annie, can you hear us?
Good morning. Yes, I can hear you. Thanks for having me. My name is Annie Massey. I live in Davis County, and I just wanted to speak about the Department of Health and Human Services data sharing that's on your agenda today. And I wrote you guys last month and was waiting for public comment last month, and it didn't happen, which is fine. But I wanted to divert a little from the email that I sent and just try to speak a little more freely. What I want the committee to understand is that parents in this nation used to provide general consent for research and studies. 1974 FERPA, it was written as a safeguard from government abuse of our information. And since that time, FERPA has been amended so much that with exceptions like the research exception, those exceptions are now becoming the rule. And this is our personal information, whether or not it's de-identified or not, it's still our children's information, which leaves digital effects. And our digital effects, along with our print effects, are governed and are safeguarded under the Fourth Amendment. So what I'm asking this committee to consider is how can you resolve to protect our child's information from being shared for research purposes that parents wholly oppose. What's been happening with our data is it is collected, and it is, I've seen it personally, manipulated, misinterpreted, and then used to derive values that are wholly inaccurate. And as a citizen, all we have left is to say, no, thank you. I don't want to participate in that. And so I'll just point to 53E2304, which says a student owns their personally identifiable data, which then the USBE de-identifies. And in my opinion, that's the same thing. It's still owned by us. And then 53E9305, which says the collection, use, and sharing of our student data has both benefits and risks, and parents and students should learn about those benefits and risks and make choices regarding student data accordingly. So my question is, and I'll just wrap up here, if a citizen owns our data, and we know that there are risks, I've seen it for years, I've spent 14 years watching this in public education. We know there are risks, and the law in Utah directs that parents are to make choices regarding those risks. Where are those choices? To be immune from the sharing of our personal information, our child's personal information, whether or not it's de-identified or not. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Annie. Next, we have Rebecca Cisneros.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for being public servants. I sincerely appreciate your time on our behalf. This public comment is to address agenda items related to the educator licensing rules you'll be considering. And I'm speaking today as the Apple Director for Itinerant Early College High School. I'm also an educator who came through an alternative license. And so I'm very grateful for those programs. I'm grateful for the time that we take to reconsider rules and processes and programs after they've had a chance to be implemented. Also grateful for the idea of competency and local-based programs. We became an Apple program in order to meet the needs of bringing higher educator professors down into K-12. As we've run this program over the last 3 years, one of the most significant concerns expressed from candidates in my Apple program was the pedagogical performance assessment. We've had 3 teachers take that, and each paid several $100s to take this assessment. And when we did a review after, they shared a common theme, which it was very much busy work, took away for a lot from their teaching and preparation time, and they felt yielded nothing of value in return. They agreed that meeting with their instructional coach regularly was more valuable, as coaching and mentoring provides actionable feedback, whereas the PPA is a summative exam. As such, when the legislature passed HB 208 this past season, I was relieved and grateful to have removed this burdensome and expensive requirement. I currently have 2 math teachers working through alternative licensing right now. Both have a degree in math and statistics. And you can imagine they were also relieved, as over the next 3 years, they will take 5 pedagogy courses, 2 math courses, and 2 micro-credentials, as well as all of the other licensing requirements, in addition to teaching full-time math load. So this bill made them feel appreciated for their willingness to become educators, recognizing the demands of licensure and seeking to remove one. The rules before your committee seem to me to simply substitute the phrase pedagogical performance assessment for teaching competency evaluation. And in my mind, these are synonyms, and in the rule would essentially serve the same purpose. What I can't understand is, why is a summative evaluation a fundamental requirement? Prior to recommendation, my candidates completed multiple pedagogy courses, observed multiple teachers, were observed by administrators numerous times, reflected on their own competencies and dispositions, worked regularly with an instructional coach to receive the targeted feedback, and directed courses. Additionally, it is not in mine or any LEA's interest to retain, promote, or encourage a teacher who is subpar. And those of us in education know that a teacher's capacity is often obvious well before the 3-year mark without the need for a third-party administered test. Please do not approve the rules in the draft format sent to your committee. Instead, please instruct staff to remove all reference to any type of assessment or evaluation that deals with testing a teacher's pedagogy or teaching competency as the law requires. Again, thank you for your attention to this matter and your service to the education community. It is appreciated.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay. Any more public comment? Okay, thank you. Let's move to agenda item 2.2, policy number 2004, board member communications. We have Ben Rasmussen, who's going to tee that up for us. And we also have Vice Chair Carey, who's been working on this, and we can pose questions to either. Ben?
All right. Thank you, Chair. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. This first agenda item is at the request of, Board Member Carey, Board Member Wood, and Board Member Davis, I believe, joined in the request on this. Draft 2 is the updated draft that Board Member Carey has asked that the committee review. I'm not sure why my screen is not going up there, so I'll check that in a second. But essentially, the language being added is at the end of the policy. It adds a requirement that for making sure the board receives copies of communications between board leadership and elected public officials, if the elected public officials consent, and then it's given some new requirements on that, and also requires board leadership to copy the board if they're communicating with LEA superintendents or charter school directors on the board's behalf.
Okay. Questions, committee members? Do we need a second to process?
I didn't select the screen. I think I figured it out. I should just need.
Member Lear?
I have to, there we go. I do appreciate that Member Carey gave us plenty of time the committee members time to look at this, and he was responsive to some of my questions. I think most of my concerns and questions. And as I look at this, and I only looked at draft 2 right now. The only question that I can see immediately, and maybe some of the other board members or committee members will prompt some questions, but the one concern I see right now is at the very end, where the board secretary is directed to send correspondence of a certain type, which is now much clearer than it was, to board members within 24 hours. And that seems like a very short turnaround. And Sybil's not here to ask her if that's realistic, but many things are sent on a Friday afternoon, and I don't necessarily want her worried about sending correspondence to the board, to 15 board members over the weekend. So the 24 hours right now is though it's a very small thing and a small part of this, I would like it to be within 2 business days or something like that. That's a suggestion, not a motion. So other than that, I'm fine. And yes, we'd probably like to hear from Member Carey about what prompted his concerns.
Joe, are you available to respond to that?
Yeah, I am. Just you may hear the airport announcements in the background, but yeah, and just to Board Member Lear's comment, I would treat that as a friendly amendment to 2 business days. That only applies to correspondence being sent out. And the thinking was, well, if they're sending it to an LEA, just add the board to it. But I'm happy to amend that so the 2 business days instead of 24 hours. And then I'd like to speak to the motion, if I may, Chair.
Please. We don't have a motion yet, but
To the
to the document, yes, to the document, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I just want to make this clear. This is not an attempt to get at personal email or any type of correspondence directed to 1 member of board leadership or even 2 members of board leadership. This is about capturing communication from elected public officials who are reaching out to board leadership. The presumption when that happens is that this is an attempt by an elected public official to communicate with the entire board through board leadership. So I just want to stress that, and I appreciate the feedback from Board Member Lear, Board Member Davis, Board Member Wood, and we've singled in on specific language in that regard. So this really is about when we have issues that come before us, that if there is an elected public official who is trying to communicate their position on a particular matter before USBE, that when they address all 3 members, that correspondence be shared once that elected official signs off on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any concern we've been asked in the past to, we don't typically send back and forth messages to the full board. It's usually we receive messages, right? But there's not really a correspondence back and forth. Does this step into that arena when we start having this sharing of correspondence? Who are we looking at? We're going to request Ashley Beal to address that.
So you're asking if it might be either violate the spirit or the letter of grandma? Is that what you're saying? The Government Records Act?
The Open and Public
Open
Meetings.
Public Meetings Act?
Yeah. AAG Beal, I see you've joined us. Can you shed light on
Sure.
that?
So to send out communications to the whole board.
Yeah, and Vice Chair Kerry, maybe you've looked at this. I'm sorry, this was a question just this morning, but maybe you've looked at this and you have a thought as well. I just thought, we are encouraged not to, or told not to share back and forth with each other. Here we're talking about a correspondence between board leadership, all three, like Vice Chair Kerry mentioned, and an public elected official. And then we share that with the board. Does that bring it to an open meetings issue, or anyway, AAG Bill, will you speak to that?
Yeah, it raises an interesting issue. I don't want to give you a concrete answer because I'm not 100% sure. I would say, you receive emails and communications as a board when people email in public comments, for example, and that's not a problem, right? Because the board is not communicating about board business as an entity as a whole, circumventing OPMA. However, I think it becomes an issue when there are ongoing discussions. So it's maybe one of those situations that's kind of a fine line that is lineated by whether there are responses, where a sharing of an email is okay to say, here's a correspondence that was received, review it. But if there's any kind of ongoing discussion about it in email form, that's going to be an OPMA violation. So I think it runs the risk of violating OPMA, but I don't think on its face that it does.
That's it.
Chair, if I may.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's helpful. Yeah, no, that's helpful. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I actually consulted with legislative counsel on this to make sure that we weren't running afoul of it. And remember, we're not discussing. This is just communication that's being provided almost as an FYI to the full board. Now, that doesn't preclude a board member, once they receive it, from reaching out and saying, hey, I saw that you wrote this letter, but that would be done on a 1-on-1, 5-on-1, however they want to pursue it. But it would not be a back and forth via correspondence between the 15 members of the board, or even 8, and that particular representative. This is done primarily about notification, not discussion or dialogue.
Okay,
thank you. Member Lear?
I have 3 quick things, and I know Joe's time is limited and he'd like to vote on this. So I'll maybe start with the first. I would like to make an amendment to the proposed policy that would change all of the time frames within it. There's a 40, and I don't see line numbers on here, but under number 4, there's 48 hours, and then at the very end, the 24 hours. I'd like to change all of those to 2 business days within the document, within the policy. I think I caught them all. So that's my amendment, my proposed amendment. The second thing is, I note that under number 1, it says, let's see, where it talks about, and I'm trying to go fast, Joe, where it talks about that it's not now I lost the line, where it's, shoot, where it's not a member, it's comes to all board leadership, and it would not otherwise be a violation of GRAMA. So that allows board leadership, I think, to consider the exceptions to GRAMA, because it has to be both as I read this.
So how would you,
4A.
what is your proposed change there then?
I'm not proposing a change there. I'm just saying that gives board leadership the opportunity to say, if there's if I further send this, it would, for instance, if it's about the character and competence, and that's not quite the right language from GRAMA, that's more from the Open and Public Meetings Act and executive sessions. But if it's about a person's If it's personalized, highly personalized information that the board leadership is receiving, then, and maybe that it just is easy for that person to ask the elected official, and the elected official says no, because you do say now they have to request it. But I think that it allows for an evaluation by board leadership about the exceptions in grandma. Am I wrong there, Angie? Oh, I'm sorry. You were letting Ben take this. Sorry, Ben.
Well, basically, it's just saying if the letter is subject to grandma. I don't think we've talked about exceptions to grandma on there, so I'm not sure how you're reading it. But we're just basically saying if it's a matter of board business, they should ask the elected official if they can share it. Is what that
And I
is
guess
how that paragraph reads as I look at it.
Okay, and maybe I'm reaching, and I'm not proposing a change or anything. I'm just suggesting that I think it gives board leadership an opportunity to say, is this too personal? Is this a violation of grandma? Or might it be is it a protected document under grandma or private, so that it should not necessarily be shared? But I think I'm maybe reaching, I'm getting too tedious about it. So I just noted that. So I'd like to make the proposed change. And then the third thing I'd like is just, Molly's here with us, and I know she would probably say she doesn't like speaking for all of board leadership, but I would like to hear a response quickly and see if that's something that board leadership is comfortable with.
Molly?
Yeah, you're right. I do not. And so I'm going to give the disclaimer that this is not a position of all of board leadership, but just one member of board leadership. This is pretty cut and dry. This is what we aspire to regularly. The 2 working days is a little tight. We are a volunteer board, and many of us have jobs, and to connect with the writer of the letter, and then to connect with our secretary or our communicator, and follow those channels. You think 2 days is long, but it's really not. That is a concern. I actually would like to, and I know this is a little bit of a mind shift, but I don't think this needs to be limited to board leadership. I think that anytime a document or a shared communication or something is presented to a group or sent to a board member from an elected official, I think that needs to be shared, not just board leadership, but in any case. I can tell you there are times when people have contacted a member of board leadership and asked about an issue or a conversation or a document, and we had no information about it whatsoever. So I think we should pause and consider not just board leadership, but how we're managing communications as a whole board, because while this has a very narrow scope, the way communication has evolved, I am concerned that we have a lack of transparency, and this is where we would address it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that response, and I realize I accept it as your opinion, not everyone's. And that gives me pause for one reason. 2 days, as you explain it, does seem tight. I know that Joe's concern was to get that information promptly. So my opinion is three business days might be more realistic. Go ahead. I mean, sorry, Matt.
You're good. Go ahead, Molly. You're good.
I completely understand starting the process in 2 business days. That's why we have 3 members of leadership. Somebody should be available to get it started. I'm worried that if you contact an elected official, we are at their mercy, which usually we could work it out, but there's, I like to stick to making rules around our behavior and not making that contingent on somebody else's. And that part just gives me a little bit of pause. I don't want to drag it out. Now, I will tell you when the one instance that I received communication, it was, I think it was the morning of a board, and instead of immediately sending that out, we waited and read the letter aloud because of the concerns about open meetings, and we just wanted it out in the on the record. So, you know, that is a responsibility of leadership to communicate well. I just think it's also a responsibility of all board members as part of a governing board.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now I'm kind of rethinking this in terms of, should this be a responsibility of all board members, Matt? And I'm sorry if I'm too informal because there's just the two of us, but
No, you're fine.
I'm wondering if this should be a responsibility of all board members, and maybe I want to give that a little more thought. So I'm pausing, but I would suggest to Member Carey, who's driving this, that probably 3 business days in those 3 different places would be more realistic. And I realize that 2 of them are completely within our control and 1 is not. But I still think that is we might as well be realistic. And unless he wanted to add something to the extent possible or something like that.
Vice Chair Carey does have his hand up, so we'll jump to him and then we'll jump back to you, Molly.
Yeah, I really appreciate the remarks by Vice Chair Hart, Board Member Hart, and I think they deserve merit. I am okay to change the proposal to 3 business days, and what I would like to do is, I think that Board Member Hart, her proposal is one that we really should consider. I think it would improve not only communication, but maybe even move the board in a more cohesive direction if we were all on the same page that way. But I would like to make the motion on this proposal and then suggest that we can meet in earnest to discuss a draft 3 that may include, particular provision in that regard. So if, you said you were going to go to Board Member Hart, so I don't want to make my motion until after she gets the chance to speak.
Well, are you, does that wrap up your comments, Joe?
Oh, it does. Thank you.
Okay, Molly, go ahead.
And I would be speaking in favor of that. Regardless, that was a thought that came to me late, and I do want this to move forward. And it's not a departure from practice, so I have no trouble with this whatsoever. And I don't think that the number 1, request permission from the elected official to share the community within 48 hours. As long as the process starts, I'm just not sure that I guess it does say within 48 hours of receiving consent to share. So
yeah, that doesn't mean that we're going to receive the email within 48 hours.
Right.
It just means board leadership will act within, start the process.
Yeah, good point.
I do feel more comfortable, though, in my thinking about how processes work and how it works in leadership, to using the metric of business days rather than hours. it just, business days are business days and hours are something completely different. And I just think it's a more appropriate metric, given weekends and holidays and yada, yada. So I support moving this forward. I also would like to look at just as Member Carey said, look at a draft that we could propose as an option when it goes to the full board that expands it from board leadership to members of the board.
Thank you. We'd like to move with some motions, whatever those are. I see Member Wood has her hand up, so we'll go there and then let's get moving on some action.
Thank you.
Member Wood.
They are emptying the boat, so if it gets loud, I apologize. I will mute quickly. Quick question on conversation back to the Open and Public Meetings Act, and some concern I have in what was said about, well, maybe one member will refer back, or maybe 5 members could refer back to this old publicly elected official. What kind of behind the scenes now are we creating with potentially multiple communications? I don't know, and maybe as Carol said, maybe I'm reading things into it, seeing problems that won't exist. But I know at times right now, things are done behind the scenes where someone says, oh, well, we've talked to the board, when it was never official. It was never the board's decision. It was a couple of members who are members of the board speaking, and now the message is, well, the board approves this because a handful of board members spoke to it, not even being leadership. How do you create that cohesiveness that Member Carey talks about when we're trying to avoid Open and Public Meeting Act violations? Just, can anyone address those concerns?
Well, I'm sure Vice Chair Carey has some comments here. Let me just read the proposed language. 4A1, request permission from the elected official to share the communication with the board. So if the public official reaches out to board leadership and asks a question, or they have a correspondence and they don't really want to hear from the rest of the board members, then they would say, no, don't share it. This is how I'm viewing it, is they'd say, no, don't share it. I'm really not interested in their feedback. If they say, yeah, I'd actually like to hear from some others. Well, one, I would hope that they would include them in the email originally. And then 2, if they were, then they would just say, yeah, share it with them and get back what they get back. That's just my thoughts. Joe, did you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Chair. No, what you said really is the direction I see it going. If they want the feedback, public official granted. If not, they won't.
Okay. All right. Seeing no hands, I'm looking for any kind of motion. Joe?
I'd like to make a motion, yeah. Ben, do you have something drafted? But I'm going to ask that Chair Hymas read it because I can't see it on my phone.
Okay.
So is he making the motion to amend the policy then?
I think we agreed through this.
Yeah. So the motion,
Yes.
the motion that that is prepared right now is that the committee approve board policy 2004 draft 1 and forward to the board for approval. I think we would at least want to change that to draft 2, and then
Well, it'd be draft 2 is amended.
draft
Yeah.
2 but we haven't amended it here.
Well, there's a motion to amend. I'm just not sure who's making it.
Well, I guess my question is, if we're going to continue to work on this, do we want to make a motion to amend now, or do we want to just start working on this? Carol,
No,
go ahead.
I'd prefer.
Personally, I'd rather make it 3 business days. So that's the draft we're working from.
Okay, and Joe, you had a comment?
Without objection to that.
Okay, so let's put that on the before the committee then.
That would be I think by
So, okay, so we could just say draft 2 as amended.
with
And the committee is
consensus.
good for that. Okay, so the motion before the committee then is going to be that the committee that the committee approve board policy
So
2004
you're just
draft
taking the
2.
amendment without objection?
Yeah,
How we're doing this?
Well, I think
Is that a
I'm
problem?
Trying to include the amendment in the motion.
Well, so he's restating the motion to amend the whole policy, but I just wasn't clear that they'd formally accepted the amendment. So
let's make this quick. There's a motion on the floor that the committee amend the timelines in draft 2 or I and double I and 5C to reflect 3 business days. Any discussion to that motion? All in favor, say aye.
I,
Okay, it passes unanimously. Now we're going to come to, we have another motion that Vice Chair Carey is putting forward that I'm going to read. And that is that the committee approve board policy 2004 draft 2 as amended and forward to the board for approval. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
I,
Aye. Okay, that passes unanimously and we will get to work. Thank you.
Chair Hymas, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Vice Chair Carey, be safe. Enjoy your whatever business trip or whatever is happening.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
We will move on to item 2.3, research data sharing agreement with Department of Health and Human Services. We have Katie Chalice with us and we'll turn the time over to her.
Thanks. Sorry. Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. Good morning to the two of you that are here. And hello to you guys that are online. Oh, good. And it looks like we have Stephen here, so that's great. I'll just give you a brief introduction to this data sharing agreement proposal. Again, this is at the discretion of the committee, whether you want to recommend this to the board. So the proposal is as follows. And I'll let Stephen answer any specific questions that you might have. DHHS administers several early childhood programs, specifically the ones that are the group is interested in evaluating are Baby Watch, Early Intervention, Women, Infant, Children Program, Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program, and the Early Childhood Developmental Screening Ages and Stages Questionnaire. These programs have been around for a long time and are administered completely independent of USBE. But DHHS is hoping to better understand how these early childhood programs affect students later in their education career. So when they have entered the K-12 school system. And for that reason, they're seeking what we call a data match. So DHHS would send us, if approved, would send USBE a file that has a student ID for any of the students that have participated in any of these programs. They would send that to USBE with other information that would allow our data and statistics staff to conduct a data match. And then the USBE staff would send back that same student indicator with other information aligned. For example, PEEP results for each of those students, KEEP results for each of those students, indicators of whether those students were chronically absent. So that's how the data sharing would work. I'm happy to answer kind of privacy questions, but as I mentioned, Stephen Matherly, who's the one who's been facilitating this request, is online. Anything you want me to add, Chair?
No, I think that's great. We've had 2 months to look over this and email questions. I see that Member Lear has her light on, so we'll turn to her.
And my question is pretty simple. In the matching at the USBE, I'm assuming, maybe wrongly, that's what I'm asking. Would a number be assigned instead of a student's name?
Yeah, Chair, would you like me to respond to that?
Please.
I introduced myself, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You're still the same person, I guess.
Yes. So the student identifier, the non-name student identifier that we would that would be assigned is actually the same one that DHHS would send to us. I don't know if it's, I'm assuming it's like maybe a 6-digit randomized number.
Okay.
That's what we would receive that from them and also send it back to them with no student names or other identifying information.
And one more quick follow-up. And so if there's an N size that's too small, that would be respected, right?
No, in this case, no, because we're not talking about aggregated data. So it is student level data, meaning even if there was only one student participating in that cohort, the researchers would receive the data for that student. N sizes, we usually mask low N sizes when we're providing data in aggregate, and that's not the case here.
How do you square that with FERPA?
Oh, yeah. So this is, I would consider this to be, while it's technically de-identified, we still consider it student level data. So in some extent, to some extent, FERPA would consider that the equivalent of personally identifiable information. The exception that would allow us to share this data, if you choose to, is the audit and evaluation exception.
Okay, all right, so de-identified, but otherwise you would say this is and then all of those protections apply to the researcher, the auditor, whatever.
Yes.
However we characterize that.
I want to just make sure I agree with what I said about the audit and evaluation exception.
I think there's a research exception.
There is, but that is only, the studies exception is only for if you're evaluating
At
instructional programs
But-
or financial aid.
But wouldn't you be because at least with the one program, because it's how do these students do later in their education career?
Yes.
We do have.
Can
just-
I look into that?
Yes.
Okay. thank you.
We do have questions
Go ahead. I'm done.
Member Hart and Member Wood, and
I'm finished.
okay. Member Lear is finished here. Member Hart, I don't know if Katie is currently looking up some information. Is your question to data privacy or to the program?
My question is, how much time and it just occurred to me, and if we don't have an answer, I understand. How much time will this take our staff? This is not as easy as some other data requests would be. I'm wondering about
Let's come back to that one as she's looking up another one, because
Okay.
I appreciate that question as well. So hang on to that.
Okay.
We'll address Katie. Leanne, is your question to Katie or Stephen?
I'm wondering about, so when families sign up for these Department of Health programs, they understand that they'll be part of a bigger informational gathering, but do they recognize that this will go into their elementary school years also? Like, have they given permission from A to Z, or did they give permission solely for that program? And now we're adding to the amount of information that we're sharing on their child. What permissions have parents given?
So
From
that's
the
a
start.
question that I had similarly, and I don't know if we can address that to Stephen, because you get permission from the parent before they ever go to school. And from what I'm understanding, we're asking to just continue on without reminding, I guess, the parent that they've agreed to this. So is that a question that Stephen can answer?
Hello. Thank you for your time. Stephen Matherly, Department of Health and Human Services. I'm a health program coordinator here. I work in our informatics department as well as our early childhood department. Our parental consent and releases do speak to combining our data with other sources. I would not say that they're explicit, that calling out USBE data is one of those sources, but our consents do say we leverage this data to evaluate the effectiveness of our programs. And often this data is matched with other data sets to help inform, our assessments and evaluations.
So how do you let parents know that you're following their student for years and years?
It's in our consent language. What I just mentioned, that we will engage in research and program evaluation. And often this data is combined with other data to help inform the process.
And does it say, I mean, in a meeting I had a few days ago, I brought up the University of Utah does a study. They wanted to study my child for 20 years. You know, it was pretty clear how long they wanted to do it. They were engaged. I mentioned that after 3 years I was done. So we cut that off. And do parents have that option, or is this all behind the scenes? Like, oh, hey, you agreed to this, you know, and we're going to follow your kid throughout school now, and there's nothing you can really do to stop this, or right, we're not going to remind you or tell you, so we're just going to take your data.
Consents expire when a child turns 18. And at that point, we would have to get consent from that child who is now a student. We're looking specifically at kindergarten through third grade results. So we're not looking for any data beyond third grade.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
I was able to bring up the language for each of these programs is just a little bit different. I was able to locate some of the language. I can read it to you if you'd like. A good example of one of our consents, if you'd like to hear that.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing some head nods from committee members, so please.
I authorize my provider to share my child's, this has to do with the developmental screening program, developmental screening results with the Utah Department of Health and Human Services to facilitate developmental screening, research, and data sharing among early care and education providers to improve children's early intervention services and school readiness outcomes. And another line that goes along with that I mentioned, the information collected along with additional information obtained from other sources will be used by authorized researchers and health and early child care providers to improve child well-being and school readiness. So we do mention school readiness, school success.
Let me just, Stephen, before I turn it back over to the committee, I want to address this this question and concern that one of our public commenters made, and that is that her child's data is her child's data, and I agree with that. And you're saying that you can't take her child's data unless she consents to that. Is that so? You're getting data from the USBE, but only on that child. Is that what I'm hearing from both parties? I guess I'm looking at Katie as well. So it's not that we're sharing all data and you're comparing those who've consented with all of the data. You're only getting the data of those who have signed up. Okay. Thank
We're
you
only
for that
asking
clarity.
for data for children that have received these services, not all data. We actually would like to compare outcomes for children that we've served, that we've engaged, that families have engaged consistently in the services, compared, contrasted to families that didn't engage, deeply in the services.
But only for those who have signed that consent form. So I appreciate that. I'm gonna jump back over to Katie to finish. She looks like she's found some answers, and then we're gonna ask Molly to re-ask her question about staff time. So Katie.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I'm clear now that the exception that allows for this data sharing is the audit and evaluation exception, which is intended to be used to evaluate the efficacy of state and federal programs. So whereas the programs that DHHS fall under that category, that's what it would allow for this.
Thank you. Molly?
Yeah, I actually now have two questions. One is to the representative. Can children participate? Well, can parents participate in this program without giving consent to this? Or is this a condition of being in the program?
There's 4 different programs, we're talking about.
Oh, that's right.
So the ASQ program, we have recently redone those consents so that a parent can participate and still deny that their data be shared outside of that program and system. With WIC, it is contingent upon receiving the services that when you enroll during the intake of paperwork, you agree by receiving the services that the research can be conducted. And that's very similar to home visiting and baby watch. Over time, we do hope to do exactly what I said for the first program and the others, give parents the options to participate regardless whether they consent to sharing their data or not. It's a heavy lift to do that. We've been able to do that with our Ages and Stages questionnaire program, but as far as data controls and things of that nature, it's more complex, but we are headed that direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Kate, Director Chalice, does our staff have an estimate on how much time it would take? I'm concerned about data match is a lot different than aggregate data. Do we have an estimate on time required?
Yeah, I'm guessing that this would take the data and statistics staff, a single staff member, maybe 1 to 2 days. Based on my understanding from Erin. Admittedly, it's not my work, so I could be wrong.
Understood. I appreciate and I understand the condition. Thank you for that estimate.
Thank you. Member Wood? Uh-oh, you hit mute twice, I think. You unmuted, then remuted.
Sorry, just to clarify, so that one area where parents could opt out, their data would not be shared if they chose to opt out on this. That you're able to pull that group out for that one program that you stated.
Right, for the Ages and the developmental screening program, which many care providers participate in. If a parent opts out of data sharing, the data does not flow into our database.
The problem with that is that we would be sharing data on students that went through these programs many years ago, correct? Well, not many, but years ago.
The request does go from 2017 forward. And yes, the previous consents for ASQ are like the other three. By continuing, by enrolling, you agree to data sharing. It's just within the last 2 years that we've been able to evolve the ASQ program to give parents multiple options.
Understood. Thank you.
Someone asked about small size suppression earlier. So any reports that we share, anything of that nature will be aggregated and of course employ small cell size suppression.
Oh, so it does.
Okay.
Yeah. After the matching has been done, anything that goes that's publicly available or even available from staff would have a small cell size suppression.
Okay. Any other comments or motions?
I do. I have two. One is, how hard would it, well, first of all, it sounds like for the one program, it's an opt-in. So unless the parent agrees to the data sharing, it doesn't happen for the one program. Is that accurate, Stephen?
The default is yes, but they have the ability to click a box that goes to no. There's five different boxes they can check. And if they check any of those boxes as no, then the data doesn't flow into this. And that's 2023 going forward.
Okay, that was my first, actually I had three. Second question is I think we can't ignore in talking about this, I think we cannot not ignore the advantage for all children and the system generally to have this information, to find out. I mean, this is something that will definitely benefit the system in finding out if these programs help children do better in school. So I don't want to lose that in terms of worrying about the prime directive of data privacy. That there's an advantage to the whole system generally in and even individual families in knowing if these programs help make children's lives better. So I wanted to say that. And thirdly, how hard would it be to and it sounds like you've done this regularly, but how hard would it be to revise your consent statement on all of these programs? And I'm just going to take a stab at it to say something like, your child's data will be used as he enters school and at least through the 3rd grade or something like that, that gives parents more notice of how long the data will be analyzed.
But if this is approved, the WIC program will list USB specifically as a data sharing partner, and we can work with the other programs to do that too. I should mention what's happening above and beyond this. We're working on creating a citizen portal where us citizens, parents can go and see how their data is being used and shared, and then be able to opt in and opt out. And that's something bigger that's happening that's going to take a few years, but that will help address many of these concerns. And also really appreciate your comment. We serve over 60,000, these 4 programs serve over 60,000 children under 6 a year. And we really want to know if we're making a difference. Are children arriving at school healthy and ready to learn, or are we missing the mark and we need to do better? And without this kind of match link data, we have no way of discovering that.
And see, didn't quite answer my initial question. How hard would it be? And I think you almost got to it when you said we'll work with USBE staff. Does that mean you could revise the language somewhat to make it clearer to parents that this analysis would follow their children into their first years of school?
We can do that specifically with each individual program. So for example, WIC, when you enroll in WIC, there's a page that lists every entity that their data might be shared with. For example, we have the Utah Data Research Center on there right now. We could list USBE on WIC. For our ASQ, which I read earlier, it does talk a lot about school readiness, and we could become more explicit, and we could work with the home visiting and the Baby Watch program, which is a Department of Ed funded program, to also explicitly list that a USBE data sharing is happening with USBE.
And I was more concerned about the years, but Katie's telling me that's a yes, that you could work with the USBE to have language that expressly says follow them into their school years, not just sharing with USB, but that I hear you that as a yes. So thank you.
Okay, any other, do we have a motion that somebody's willing to make?
I'll make the motion.
Chair, I have one
Further question.
Molly, go ahead.
further question. Is it possible to go back and get consent from these would have birth years earlier than 2 years when that consent was changed? Is it possible to go back and get consent from those individuals? Or to give them the option of an opt-out?
I don't think so. That would be under the previous. I mean, we do have consent. It's just our new consent for the ASQ program is more comprehensive, more elaborate, and that is quite a heavy lift, and it takes several years to do that. But we do have consent for all these programs, just not the ability to participate in the program and opt out of data sharing, except for 2023 going forward with the ASQ program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Katie, go ahead.
I just want to clarify back to Board Member Lear's question. I think the group is clear, but just for ultimate clarity, the data sharing that would be permitted of this kind of student level data is under the audit evaluation exception, but it is always the case that after the researcher or the evaluator, the auditor conducts their study, that they do have to report in such a way that masks low N sizes. So I just wanted to be clear on that. While it might allow for student level data sharing initially, any public facing report would need to be masked. Thank you.
Member Lear.
I move that the committee approve the research data sharing agreement with the Department of Health and Human Services, USBE number, and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the research data sharing agreement with the Department of Health and Human Services and forward to the board for approval. All in favor say aye. I guess we'll do a roll call since it's kind of challenging online. So Member Lear, aye, and then Member Hart
No.
and Member Wood.
No.
Okay. That motion does not pass with 2 in favor and 2 opposed. Okay. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Stephen. We are going to move to agenda item 2.4, R277-490, Beverly Taylor Sorensen Elementary Arts Learning Program. And Angie Stallings is going to start us off.
Thank you. And I apologize. I apparently have a new app I have to install before I can share screen. So maybe, Ben, would you just go ahead and share screen so I don't have to take the committee's time. I'll start with some background on the rule changes, and then once Ben has the drafts up, we can go through the changes. So first, this last session, and Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy, I couldn't remember if I introduced myself. In HB 120, that was the big budget bill. Embedded in that bill was a requirement for the State Board of Education to establish a uniform amount for the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Elementary School Arts Program, also known as BTS Arts Program. And so that is the primary reason why we are updating 490 today. Although in addition to establishing the uniform amount, and why don't you go ahead and open up draft 3, Ben, and I'll just use that. Both drafts 3 and 4 are identical with the exception of subsection 2 in the uniform amount section. So I'll just kind of go through the changes that will apply to both, and then we'll focus on that subsection 2, and I'll describe the 2 options. So first, we categorize the rule as a category 3 at the beginning of the rule in accordance with the requirements of R277-111. The next change is the defined term of highly qualified school arts program educator and arts educator on lines 50 through 60. I will state that in a moment, once we decide on options 1 or 2, meaning drafts 3 or 4, I will make a request. I have a motion drafted. Based on some feedback we received on Wednesday, there was a request to move that defined term, that's subsection 5. So Ben, if you'll show them line 51. The term arts educator is used frequently in this rule, and the term highly qualified school arts program educator is not. So the request was to actually move the arts educator first. So I will ask somebody to make a motion just to allow me to move arts educator first and then renumber it. It's just a technical change, but I didn't want to make it, since we already had so many drafts, I thought I would wait to see if there were other amendments that would be made. So if that's the only amendment that will be made, I wanted to bring that to your attention. It's just a technical change, but it would make the defined term arts educator and then move that to number 1 on the list. And it'll make it easier for people to find, because we had quite a few people ask us, what does arts educator mean? Does it mean any and every arts educator in the state, or is it just those participating? I think this will help by moving that term up and switching and taking out the highly qualified. So one of the big defined terms does start on line 64, which is the total arts educator salary amount plus benefits for arts educators statewide. That is a mouthful. The reason why we had to define this is because it's part of an equation or a formula to establish the uniform amount. And really the difference between drafts 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 are primarily for this defined term. And that is because we had unintentionally forgotten to exclude, which was a requirement of HB 1, to exclude the educator salary adjustment from the calculations of the BTS arts educator salaries as we're doing this equation. And also to add subsection B, which just states that when our staff, when we're doing the calculations to determine the total arts salary amount plus benefits for arts educators statewide each year, that the superintendent or staff will take into account the full-time or part-time status. So when you get a calculation of, say, an arts educator's salary is only 35,000, well, that could be because that our educators at part-time, and that we would take that into account in the formula. So the next changes, there's a lot of technical changes, but the next changes start on around line 93, which move the application requirement up from May 1 to January 31. This is so that much earlier in the process, we'll know how many new arts educators will be participating in the program or who have been approved to participate in the program, which is critical to determining the uniform amount. And that's why the application timeline has to move up. The other, I guess, good part of the changes here is that no longer will those LEAs participating be required to do an annual application. Instead, it will be once every 3 years. And in the off years, the LEA would simply submit a notice of intent to continue in the program in the off years. So hopefully that will provide less application and less work for LEAs. And then the biggest changes, the biggest portion of this rule do come in section 5, which starts on line 108, but the new language begins on line 129. So subsection 1A, again, this is the same in both drafts 3 and 4. It describes how the staff will establish this uniform amount every year. And I'll try to make it as simple as possible, but it essentially is you're going to take the total educator salary amount plus benefits for all participating BTSA arts educators statewide from the most recent school year divided by the number of educators who participated to get that average salary amount. And then in subsection C, it just states you'll set aside the amounts for the endowed universities. And then after setting that aside in D, that if the amount of the appropriation is not sufficient to distribute the uniform amount, that uniform amount will be reduced down, which will be the case in this year, and we'll show that in just a moment. Again, as determining the uniform amount and what should be distributed to LEAs, you take into account the part-time or full-time. Now, Ben, could you go to just quickly before we move to subsection 2, I did want to just show that the backup, there's a, let me see what it's called. I apologize. It's the graph or the modeling of the distributions. It's probably second to last. If you look at this, and Sam Uri has also joined us virtually, when you look at the document, you can see, and I apologize, I'm going to try and I'm a little bit hindered today because I am using I'm using a loaner laptop. And so that is why I'm having a hard time navigating. But if you look at that document, okay, in the right-hand corner, you'll see there's the average arts educator compensation at the bottom. It says 89,600. That is what the uniform amount would be if we had a full appropriation that would fully fund. That is the actual average salary amount. But because the appropriation amount is less than is needed to distribute 89,000 per arts educator, it is being prorated or reduced to 74,516 to match the appropriation. And then the $71,000 amount that you see there is based on projections that we anticipate some additional 10 arts educators likely going to be participating this year. So I wanted to share that with you because that's essentially all of subsection 1. It's subsection 1A is getting to that, or B is the 89,000, and then moving it up to that 71,000 is the reduction based on, again, the amount of the appropriation and then the number of arts educators who participate. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on that before we move back to the draft? And then I'll describe the 2 options, and then we're pretty close to being done. I apologize. I'm probably taking too much time.
I'm not seeing any hands, so
Okay.
go ahead.
Yep, go ahead and go back to 3. And so, let me get back to, if you go back now to lines 150 through 153, I'm going to show you these lines are different and essentially option 1 is draft 3, option 2 is draft 4. So in option 1, subsection 2 would distribute that uniform amount of approximately $71,000 to LEAs or a consortium of LEAs, which currently we don't have any LEAs participating in that way, but it is still allowable for 2 or more LEAs to combine together to then share an arts educator, for example. But in this case, this would state that every LEA would receive that flat $71,000 amount, regardless of whether the LEA's arts educator costs were $71,000. The reason I state this is there could be a case where an LEA's arts educator costs, say, $60,000 instead of 71. There's also going to be some arts educators that will cost $100,000 instead of 71. So in the case of 2, everybody would receive the 71, and then those that have arts educators that make less than 71,000, they would retain the difference or the excess funds for art supplies or to support their programs in accordance with the requirements of BTSA. And then now, Ben, if you could go to draft 4.
Carol, you have a question?
Yeah, is this just a problem? I can open draft 2. I can't open.
It looks like Ben did.
Yeah, I can open, I've opened draft 4 already. Well, now it's.
Maybe that's.
You may need to refresh your browser. You might want to try that. Okay, and then in same subsection 2, the difference for option 2 is that the LEAs would receive the lesser of either the uniform amount or the actual cost of the LEA's arts educator salary plus benefits. And then you can see below in subsection 3, those are the two differences. In draft 3, everybody gets the flat amount regardless of whether their arts educators cost that much. Option 2, which is in draft 4, would provide or distribute the lesser of, then retaining the difference for those LEAs whose arts educators do not cost 71,000. You would have a remaining pot of funds that then could be used to support the program in other ways. And you'll see that in subsection 4. The last thing I just mentioned, subsection 3 explicitly requires that if the arts educator cost for an LEA is over the uniform amount, the LEA is responsible to pay the difference. So let's say, again, the arts educator's salary plus benefits is 100,000. They receive only 71 from the uniform amount. The LEA would need to provide the $29,000 difference with their own funds. And then last, subsection 4 just describes that if there are available funds, those could be distributed to LEAs for educator supplies and equipment, which is a requirement in the code, but we have not had funding sufficient to do that in the past. But if we did go with option 2, that would be a pot of money that then could be used to distribute to LEAs for art supplies, as well as engage in other activities that improve the quantity and quality of integrated arts education as required or allowed in the code. I think that's it. I don't know if so we've got Larry Baevsky and Jennifer Thronson here. And I know I did a lot of talking, so you may not see if they have anything they'd like to add.
Okay, if we have any questions, community members, I don't see any hands yet, but I will tell you, I am personally leaning towards draft 4 with the set amount of, would you say 71 or less, right? If an educator is costing the district less, then that's how much they would get. I think that would stretch farther and reach more educators. So that's my thoughts, but I'd like to see if the committee has any questions or if we are ready to move to a motion.
I have a question.
Molly, go ahead.
If it was 71,000, why couldn't, or is it an option that it's just, if you participate, you get 71,000 per teacher. And then if the teacher happens to cost less, which would mean they're probably a early year teacher, then the remainder could go towards supplies.
That's draft 3. So,
But I
Draft-
thought that was, okay, maybe, okay.
yeah, so draft 3 says that everybody participating, as far as I understand, everybody participating gets a set amount of money. And let's say you have a teacher that's part-time that you're only paying 35, you could take that remainder and put it towards the program.
Oh, okay.
Angie's going to clarify.
That's not, the
Angie,
remainder
go
goes
ahead.
back into the fund?
No, if that would be draft 4, but actually if the arts educator is part-time, they'd only get half of the uniform amount. But
Right.
if they were a full-time educator that costs, say, 60,000, then that LEA would retain the 11,000 for art supplies or to support the program in general. That would be draft 3, Board Member Hart.
Okay.
Draft 4 would say they get the lesser of, then the remaining pot of funds would be then accessible to all LEAs for art supplies, if that makes sense, and or other efforts.
Okay.
Does that answer? I'm sorry, there was a lot going on there. Molly, does that answer your question? We have a comment by Laurie as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Lori Bayevsky, Fine Arts Coordinator. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to give props to Deputy Stallings. That was brilliant. So I just wanted to clarify the difference between the 71,742 amount and the 74,516 amount. So 258 FTE is our current, that's no growth. That's the no growth. So if we don't add any schools next year, that would be the probably the approximate allocation. And then the 71,742 is if we, as Deputy Stalling said, if we continue with a growth model, which I think the LFA is very interested in, that would be the 71,742. So I just wanted to be sure that that was clarified, that those two differences. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Leanne and then Carol.
A quick question. Which one puts schools at risk? Is there a draft that is least likely to have our schools leave the program because they can't afford the art educator any longer? Which one will best support the program?
Every time I see her, we think it's 6.
All right, Angie.
I guess what I would state, and this is Angie Stallings again, that the uniform amount will be the same under both drafts 3 and 4, meaning the LEAs, that will be the max amount of the uniform amount, regardless of whether you do draft 3 or 4. The difference is with draft 4 is that the remaining funds for those that perhaps have arts educators that cost less than the uniform amount, that those funds would be pulled together and then be available for redistribution to all LEAs, including an LEA who might have an arts educator that cost 100,000, for example. That LEA could potentially receive some additional funds for art supplies and or other enrichment activities for the program. And so that potentially could be a supporter, I guess, for those that are currently participating in the program and do have arts educators that cost much more than the uniform amount. So that would be my best way of answering that. So perhaps draft 4.
Okay. Member Lear, was that your question or do you have?
No, slightly different.
Okay.
Does the staff prefer, which does the staff prefer between 3 and 4, and briefly why? One of them feels more laborious to me, the one where the money's all, and maybe this is all done by computer and not a big deal, but it feels laborious to then take all the money in and then redistribute it up to all LEAs versus give LEAs a certain amount and then they can manage it based on their own salary schedules. But speak to me about which one you prefer and why.
I don't know that we have a defined preference. I think one of the risks we're taking with draft 3 is the legislature's perspective of us overfunding educator and saying, do what you want with it. It's going to increase our monitoring requirements because now this is MSP funding. It's 1/12. We're saying put it towards the arts. We don't know that it's going towards the arts unless we monitor. So draft 3 adds burden to staff. We obviously want to, advocate for the LEAs. Draft 4 allows for us to still, provide supplies in those. One adjustment you could consider in draft 4 is right now it's supplies and equipment. It doesn't allow us to add more programs by redistributing those funds to add educators that we have maybe applications for, but weren't able to fund. But I think it's because right now you have it as we're funding everyone and we just keep reducing the amount. So it could be, we could increase the amount if people declare, you know what I mean? So it just came to my mind this morning. I'm sorry, friends. When you sit on these rules and think about implementation, it's like, oh, if we only allow this, but we could also say, well, if they don't need all of that, why can't we redistribute that to the grant amount that LEAs would receive? Because right now we're having to reduce, like the average would have been closer to 74, 75,000. But because we have so many programs, we're actually having to go to 71. But if now you have a charter who doesn't need as much, it's usually our charter setter and that newer teacher in a school district, we're disadvantaging everyone by reducing everyone's amount rather than being able to add that amount back in and advantaging everybody. I don't know. Those are my thoughts, raw as they are.
I see what you've done, Carol.
Can I supplement with something?
Yeah.
I thought we almost 3 would be easier, but I'm thinking 4 would be easier to.
And Angie has a follow-up to the comment.
So 2 things I just wanted to add. One, because we're moving the application up so much earlier than current, we will know how many approved applications we're going to have by the time we set the uniform amount. In fact, that's why we moved it up so that in the rule now, it states that the superintendent or staff will establish the uniform amount by April 15th, and the applications would be in on January 31. So I just wanted to share, I can't imagine an instance where we would open it back up to now additional educators after the uniform amount because they would have had to already designate their intent. But you do bring up an interesting question about if there's funds, then redistributing. And the one thing I was thinking is, well, maybe if we had the data on what their actual costs were before April 15th, but that is going to require a reporting burden because right now we're using like the October 1 information. I will say that without language in the rule, I wanted to just share with you that it goes unsaid, and we didn't put it in here, that if there are excess funds in any year, those funds will be retained and then be used for the next year for distribution. So you would, in some ways, if there were funds collected and they weren't used for art supplies or they weren't used for other enrichment activities, that would add to the pool of distribution for the following year. And so that might only be an issue 1 year, because then, the first year will probably one of the lower ones. But anyway, that was the only other thing I wanted to add.
Okay. Well, seeing no other questions, I know we're still thinking about this, but I'm going to put a motion forward. And I'll see if I can get this. I'm going to.
Before you do that, would you mind making that technical motion to just find terms so that it's number 1 and
So, okay. So
it is non-sub, but
I move that the committee amend R277-490 to amend and move the defined term for highly qualified school arts program educator or arts educator by stating arts educator first and renumbering the term as subsection 1. Any discussion to that motion? Okay. We'll do a roll call vote. Member Lear? Member Hart? Member Wood,
Yes.
and I'm a yes, that passes unanimously. Just so the public knows, we have 4 committee members here. Vice Chair Carey had to step away. So, okay, so that passes unanimously. Now, I am also going to move that the committee approve R277-490 draft 4 on, do I have to say as amended?
Yes.
As amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Discussion to that motion. I'm not seeing any. We'll again do a roll call. Member Wood,
Yes.
Member Hart,
Yes.
Member Lear, and I'm a yes. That passes unanimously. Thank you. And thank you, staff. Let's move on to agenda item 2.5, R277-303, educator preparation programs. And we'll turn time over to Ben Rasmussen.
Thank you, Chair Hymas, and I think Dr. Height will come up and join us for these next couple of items. So I want to point out to the committee on these next 2 items that we added a new draft this morning, and we apologize for the late notice, but I'll kind of explain why. We originally gave the committee drafts that intended, based on, I believe it's HB 208, to replace the requirement for the PPA or personal pedagogy assessment with a teacher competency evaluation, which was to be something that would be designed more at the local level and to have more take into account more factors and be more flexible for the local preparation programs. Staff has received significant feedback similar to the public comment that the committee received this morning, but we received feedback from specifically from 3 legislators and other stakeholders that staff had interpreted incorrectly the intent of the legislation, and the intent of the legislation was in fact to eliminate any requirement for an assessment as staff had proposed. So the new draft, draft 2 on R277-303 would do away with the teacher competency evaluation, PPA, all of that, and just strike that language. And so draft 2 would be the new draft, assuming you want to go that route and avoid an administrative rules hearing. It is essentially why we drafted that at the last meeting. So that is draft 2. And Dr. Height can kind of answer any questions you may have about the draft or the approach that we've taken.
Thank you, Ben. I just looking through it, I love it. It's great. And any comments? I'm ready to make a motion, but I don't want to. I want to give you a second, especially since it was uploaded this morning. But you can see, as Ben has pointed out, it's just removed those requirements. So as you're looking through this and going over this, I guess I'll ask Dr. Height, and you might even say the exact same thing that Ben said, but maybe just kind of reiterate again what's happening here with draft 2. What was the confusion, or maybe there wasn't confusion, but anyway, just a little more clarity.
Sure. Malia Hyde, I'm the executive coordinator of educator licensing. And the confusion came from the phrase pedagogical performance assessment, which was included in HB 208. It was not defined in that bill. And so we interpreted it as a pedagogical performance assessment that the board has established and approved standards for. But that was not how it was interpreted by several legislators. And so this draft removes any kind of a summative assessment for any teachers.
Thank you. Any comments or movement from the committee? Member Lear, you're kind of, I see you kind of going back and forth. I'm not sure.
No, I just want to express my frustration. I think that the bill, I read this and I received some communications from a couple of charter schools and charter directors. And I was kind of frustrated because this doesn't really apply to charters, does it? Does it apply to, it does apply to charter schools. And so that was my first passing thought. And then I thought, well, why are they communicating with me? But I'm disappointed that we're unwilling to accept a summative evaluation of a person who's going to be a teacher in a class. I understand the concern. I kind of understand the concern about the pedagogical specific process, but it doesn't seem like a holistic evaluation at the end. It just makes for weaker teachers, it seems to me. And that's disappointing that the people in charge of those teachers are okay with that. Now, they probably would say, well, we've been monitoring these people all along and we know who will be good teachers. But I don't feel like it has to be busy work. I feel like it could be a meaningful end of, like a final exam kind of. And so but I also have recognized that they have more political weight and power than I do. So the reality is, do we hold this up before administrative rules? Because those people have more, like I said, political weight than teachers do. So I would say no. And if it means we weaken the ranks of teachers, which I see this as doing, then at least we keep teachers in the classroom, which is probably better than empty classrooms. So that, I know that's pretty direct, but too bad. So I wanted to express that frustration and say I'm a little disappointed that that evaluators and people working with teachers are unwilling to have some kind of an evaluation, but I understand political realities. So I'm not making the motion.
Right.
And I may not vote for it, but I'm not going to try and fight it either.
Thank you for that. And I want to express my appreciation to staff for reaching out and getting intent behind what the law's intent was. And I think that sometimes that gets a little bit lost and it does create challenges, but sometimes our hands are tied, right? And so I do appreciate the work and effort that has gone into this to say, okay, maybe we misinterpreted, because sometimes we get feedback, I myself, right, that we're just hard-headed and no, this is the way we're going to do it. But I just appreciate the efforts that have gone into complying with law here. So
The intent of the law.
the intent of the law.
Honest.
Any other comments from committee members? Okay. Any motions that want to come forward? I will go ahead and put it forward then. So I move that the committee approve R277-303 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Member Hart? Member Lear?
That was a
Member
yes.
Wood? Got it.
Yes.
And Member Hymas is a yes. That passes 3-1 with Vice Chair Carey absent. Thank you, committee members. We will move on, and thank you, staff. We'll move on to our next agenda item 2.6. R277-301 educator licensing. And again, we have Ben here to start us off with Malia to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So a couple things to point out here. Again, we have the similar circumstance where draft 4 would be the draft that was uploaded this morning and would be the current staff recommendation here. This takes out the PPA requirement. As a reminder, the committee approved amendments to this rule in February that then went to board, but we held off on taking action on those so that we could incorporate the new changes from legislation. So the changes you see in black in draft 4 are all things that the committee has already approved. The changes that you see in other colors Blue, red, green, and purple in this case are the changes that are being proposed today. So draft 4 then is the new draft, which does similar to 303, takes away the PPA requirement, inconsistent with the legislation. Anything you want to add, Dr. Haidt?
Nope, I feel great.
Member Lear?
I do have some questions.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time understanding line 120. The superintendent may not extend an associate license with a license area in special education or related services if the educator has 3 years of experience in special. It seems like it should be may, but help me.
Chair Maya, Malia Hyde, Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. So this subsection 4 is in conjunction with subsection 3, aligns our licensing practice with federal IDEA law requirements that state an educator may only be a special educator, a licensed special educator, and providing services to students for 3 years on a non-professional license.
Okay. Oh, I see. So the associate license is a non-professional
Correct.
license. Sorry, I was late last night. I have another couple of questions. Is that okay, Matt?
Yeah, please.
Line 316, let me see if that's still the same, given some changes, probably not.
It is still the same.
Oh, okay. Let's see what. I was just wondering, this changes, and I don't know how many of these appeals you have. I was assuming not too many, right? But I'm wondering, it feels like every cliche I use now, I have to reevaluate. It feels like the fox is guarding the hen house here. And I don't think that gets to any diverse individuals, not to make light, sorry. Why the change?
Chair, may I? Yes, so this was to attend to some feedback that we've had from stakeholders that if a program recommends somebody for completing a program, in particular our alternate pathway, the Apple program, that if what their program has determined that the educator has demonstrated all of the competencies and met the educator preparation program requirements. If there's some sort of dispute between licensing staff and the Apple program or another educator preparation program, then there would be an appeal process, and that somebody who is familiar with that educator preparation program, specifically an Apple program, would be on that appeal committee.
So it wouldn't necessarily be a person who's monitoring that particular individual. It'd be a different.
Correct. So the intent would be that it would be someone without a conflict of interest. It would be a third party who's familiar with requirements, but not necessarily that individual.
I'm good with that. Last question, Matt. Line 339. Let's see. Oh, this was just if you're getting rid of the pedagogical assessment requirements. Did you miss that or no? Go ahead. If that's okay, Matt. To Malia.
Please.
Yeah, so this is, for example, in state law, there's a requirement elementary teachers take the Foundations of Reading test. And so this would remove that requirement for anybody who has a professional level license in another jurisdiction.
Oh, so, okay. So it's a different kind of a pedagogical assessment requirement. Okay. I think those are the only questions I had, and thank you for
thank you.
indulging that.
Good questions. On line 306, excuse me. On line 306, we have crossed out the PPA and then the TCE, and this is the general teacher pedagogical competencies, and those are what's standard and familiar to everybody, right?
Yes, Chair. So
Just want to clarify that this is not another.
no.
Yeah.
So these are the general teacher preparation competencies that were approved by the board
Yep.
in January of this year.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? If not, and we're at least semi-happy with this, then let's get a motion forward.
I can do
Okay.
that, Chair.
All right.
That the committee approve R277-301 draft 3 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second final reading.
We'll want draft 4 is the one we've been
Draft
looking at
4,
here.
Draft 4, you are right.
Thank you, Molly. So the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-301 draft 4 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion, Carol?
I just have to renew my concern that I feel like I know we need teachers. I think that the staff has done a yeoman job in terms of making this useful for alternative programs, but I feel like we're doing a disservice to children in not holding our teachers to a final, every kind of profession has a final evaluation. And if we don't think we're a profession anymore, then that's, I guess, where we are. So but it's a disappointment to me.
Thank you. With that, let's go ahead and vote. Member Hart,
Yes.
Member Wood,
Yes.
Member Lear, and Member Hymas is a yes. That passes unanimously. Thank you.
Reality, and that's too bad. Reality is what's sad.
Okay, let's move to agenda item 2.7. This is R277-115, local education agency supervision and monitoring requirements of third-party providers and contracts. And we have Ben to help us out here.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So R277-115 is up for its 5-year review. And so we do need to have committee action on this, whether to continue the rule or to accept the amendments staff is proposing at this meeting so that we can take action as a full board next month. This deals with LEA relationships with their education service providers. As you'll remember, the internal audit staff provided some policy questions for the board to consider last month. And we've worked with Director Davis's team, or Chief Audit Executive Davis's team, to provide some recommended amendments to the rule this month as a follow-up to those policy questions. In addition, we got some additional recommendations from Deputy Superintendent Jones to add language like you'll see on 83 through 87 about this is just draft 1, I believe.
It's in April and there's a March one. No.
Oh, it's the April draft that you want to look at, dated March 18th, I think. The April draft is the one you want to look at.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you for clarifying that. So Deputy Superintendent Jones recommended that we add the language on coding on lines 83 through 87. Then he also recommended the language on the lines 135 through 137 as far as that about holding an LEA harmless if they terminate a contract with their education service provider. The additional recommendations have all been as a result of the policy recommendations the Director or CA Davis presented the committee before. CA Davis is here if you have questions for her. Not sure if Deputy Superintendent Jones or Director Uri are with us online, but they may also be able to answer your questions if you have any. Okay.
Member Lear, go ahead.
I just have one, and I want to make sure I was reading the right draft. On line Sorry,
That's all right.
I'm looking at lines and there's all of section 3 is struck. But
If I can point that out, maybe I can explain that.
okay.
So one of the recommendations from the audit team was that we move section 3. So section 3 is still there, and in fact, you'll see that the black language language that's in black is actually new to this draft, but it's just that we moved it from section 3 to add, so that the order was better for flow purposes. And so section 3 is still there. We've just moved it. It's now I believe section 4 with the new numbering.
Then let me see. Yes.
So any underlined languages that's in black is not really new, but it's just been moved. The language in blue is what's actually the new language. I'm glad you asked that because I had meant to point that out.
And that I don't have a question. Thank you.
Ben, we've talked about service providers, third-party contractors before. I can't remember when. It hasn't been 5 years because I haven't been here that long. And I thought that we had discussed as a committee and even a board that we wanted if an LEA is going to contract with an ESP, then they are responsible for what happens under that. Do you remember when that was? If I can't remember, I can't expect you guys to.
Can I ask Debbie to come up and help me out here?
Please. I just can't, because if this is a 5-year review, now I'm thinking I've had this conversation with somebody.
We may have made amendments in the meantime too.
Okay.
Without continuing the rule, but
okay. Please, Debbie.
Okay, am I live? So Debbie Davis, the Chief Audit Executive for the State Board of Education. So yes, this is a topic that does come up. So of course we have the rule, and I think it was back in 2016, 17, 18, there was a lot of movement in this space. There were a couple of audits that were done, and R277115 was kind of the product of that. And then I think over time, there continued to be concerns in the area of third parties. It's a well-established risk that there is risk with when you use third parties. So I think it comes up for discussion. I don't know that there have been changes to the rule necessarily, but it does come up for discussion. It would be a topic that would probably come up in audit committee, just as, hey, there's a risk, should anything happen here? And of course, with the 5-year review, it's like, okay, then let's take maybe a little bit of a deeper dive since we are looking at the exact language. But I don't know that there's been anything specific in the last few years. We did have, of course, the ESP audit, the internal audit did, and that was a few years ago, but still relevant, I think, as questions have come up. But so yes, it's been discussed. Mm-hmm.
I'm only a little crazy. Thank you. One of the things is, and I know staff, I kind of reached out to you with this potential amendment as well on line 80 and 81. It says an education service provider may not enroll, register, or assign a student for enrollment or registration at an LEA. That's the proposed language. And as I look at this, and again, think if an LEA wants to contract, it's the LEA is held responsible, whether it's traditional public school or charter school or online, whatever. They're held responsible. That's who they've agreed to go with. But in this rule, the state is saying we're kind of limiting the LEA, right? Of saying, yeah, you can do a third party, but you can't let them do these 3 things: enroll, register, or assign. And again, I've shared my thoughts on this, and so I would recommend, and I don't know if I don't think I did send language to you, but
you did.
Can I just type up, or can we just show a potential amendment that I'd like to, or an amendment that I'd like to move here? And it would simply read, sorry if I can pull up because I typed this out, but An educator service provider, this would just be B, this would replace all of B. This is line 80. An education service provider may enroll, register, or assign a student for enrollment or registration under the direction of an LEA. So again, this just goes back to, and I know we're looking at a risk thing here, but the risk, I don't know if the risk should be on the state agency or on the LEA when they take this. And it might be too broad. We might have to relook at this, but I want to put this before the committee here. Because again, I've already said this several times, when an LEA signs a contract with somebody, that does not absolve them of responsibility for that student. So if I'm going to sign a contract as an LEA head, and I am using that ESP, and then I can say, well, yeah, you can do these things. I understand that I'm responsible, but that's still within their authority. Is I guess me speaking to this motion here. So let me formally move this. I move that the committee amend draft 1, line 80 to read B, an education service provider may enroll, register, or assign a student for enrollment or registration under the direction of an LEA. Let's have discussion to this motion. Carol, go ahead.
May I ask you directly?
Please.
May I ask you directly what your experience is, or did this come from another person who wants this in the rule?
That's a great question. I'm going to be completely transparent with you. Yes, somebody reached out to me. They did not push for this, actually. This was my own language. Somebody, there was a request, and I believe staff knows this as well, that to remove the word assign, because that created some implications. My thoughts, and this is why I started with, we've talked about this before, I swear we have, is
A vague recollection too, but
is that if an LEA contracts, they're still responsible for that student. You can't say, oh, that wasn't me, that was the service provider. That's who, right? That's who messed that up. It's under the LEA. So that's where that came from. Carol, does that answer your question?
have you had personal experience with this that would make it easier or harder to have an LEA do this versus a service provider? Here's my rub.
Okay.
That you're right, that you've assigned this duty to a third party, but I'm hypersensitive to the fact that these are students in your school. And so I think it's a little different. I have a hard time. There's a theory in the law that some things are not assignable. And I'm really probably simplifying that. But I feel like, given that these are your students, I feel like this is kind of the fine print of someone like you, especially working this, would be really clear that I am responsible. But many other LEAs down the line who want to use service providers who may sign up 500, 800, 1,300 students would not take it as personally that, wait, and I have the echo of a school district in my mind that got caught in that situation where several superintendents later were not particularly vigilant about what this really meant for the LEA. And so it concerns me. I'm not saying it concerns me to the point that I would not support the rule, but did you consider all of that? Does that trouble you? Do you or have you had personal experience that you have had third-party providers that you feel very confident in?
So let me try to answer series of questions here. Yeah. And that's fine. Personal experience. Yeah, I've worked with outside companies to work with our students, and I have taken personal responsibility and make sure that we are monitoring and keeping a close eye on the student, their education and their needs. So yes, on the scale that you mentioned, 500, 800, no, I haven't had that. That just goes back to my philosophy of saying, if I'm an LEA and I want to contract because I need help, I'm still responsible, 100% responsible. And then, yes, it does put pressure on these LEAs. And it also jeopardizes the third party, because if they're not doing what they're doing, and if they're not doing it well, it's my opinion that they should probably be driven out of business. That's just capitalism, I believe, right? It's like you've got to, yeah,
And the political clout.
yeah. Well, and there's going to be pros and cons here, and I guess my overarching thing here is, if you're going to sign a contract, then be responsible. Molly, go ahead.
So to me, it goes back to what problem are we trying to solve here? And I do have a concern that LEAs do not take the position that just because they're using a third-party vendor, that they're not responsible for the students. My concern is that line 80, as it is proposed, not as it is amended, not the amendment that's pending, but what is proposed is a way to get at that, but I don't think it's sufficient. So if we think that saying that they can't enroll, assign, register, or assign a student, if we think that that's sending the message that LEAs are responsible for those students, I just don't think that's sufficient. And because of that, in addition to that, when you contract with a third-party vendor, you're doing it, you're also doing it to streamline your work. You've decided that it can be whatever they're doing, that a third-party vendor can do it better or can do it more efficiently than you can. And I'm worried that this artificially, or this limits the LEA in what their arrangement looks like, but it does not serve the purpose of holding the LEA fully responsible. So I'm concerned that it circles around the issue and limits the LEA and doesn't address, I think what the problem is we're trying to solve is LEAs need to understand their own responsibility for their own students, regardless of who enrolls or assigns. So I'm worried that we're trying to solve a problem in an insufficient manner.
Okay.
And that's why I support the amendment.
Deb.
Yeah, just a couple of questions as I'm reading this. One just popped into my head. So 4A on line 78 currently states, an LEA shall register all students receiving services. And so 4B would give a little bit more clarification, as it either currently is or as the the initial proposed language on 80 is that the LEA is supposed to do that, not the ESP. And there's history of that from the audits going back to 2016, 17, 18, and even the current the most recent ESP audit, which is why we proposed the language that we did. Even today, we received a concern on the hotline about a provider that wanted to gift enrollment to a couple of LEAs of some homeschool students. So I think that's the intent, is really about the relationship between the LEA and the student and their parents, so they understand that there's enrollment there. So that's kind of the first thing, and hopefully I didn't ramble around that too well, but I think considering B in the context of A will be important to make sure we don't conflict those two statements. My other question with enrollment, and I just thought of this as well, is that, and Deputy Superintendent Stallings, or Beth, help me out. R277419 requires certain things of an LEA when a student is enrolled. Well, and you would all know this as well. So if with the proposed amendment to the draft, an ESP could do that, would there be any conflict there as well, as far as, well, when you enroll, the LEA has to check the birth certificate or the other things that have to happen with enrollment? So would there be any conflict there either? I guess those would be my two questions. Consistency with 4A and then also with 419. And maybe this isn't even ready for prime time since I'm thinking of more questions. Answer the second.
Thank you. Yeah, Angie, if you'll answer the second one.
Yes, just related to R277419. All those requirements for enrollment, like you said, the birth certificate, ensuring their residence, ensuring that there's actual communication or engagement with the student, like whether that's an attendance validated or learner validated enrollment measurements, for example. All those would still need to be required or be there. The question would be whether it's the LEA doing that or the education service provider at the direction of the LEA. So yes, just because the education service provider is now perhaps doing the legwork or doing the enrollment, et cetera, that education service provider would need to check all of those boxes in order for the LEA to be able to generate membership and get state funding for that student. So, and I understand this has been actually something we've talked about for years, because as education service providers do, or third-party providers work on behalf of LEAs, there have been families who have reached out to our office and said they didn't realize they were enrolled in ABC district or charter school. And so I think that is the difficulty, is getting that language of ensuring that LEAs and their providers are making that very clear. You are a public education student, you are enrolled in ABC district or charter school, and not then inhibiting. I mean, that's the hard part, is you don't want to inhibit if there is an administrative function or even an instructional function that LEAs want their providers to provide. It's that is the core there, is that relationship and trying to get there.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback as I'm thinking through this. Would it then be appropriate then just to, if we look at the original 80 and 81, just remove the words "or assign"? So that just read, an education service provider may not enroll or register a student for enrollment or registration. I don't know if that sounds.
You would just make it may not enroll or register.
Yeah.
Can we cue that up, Ben? Can I withdraw a motion then and cue that up? And then what would that wouldn't bring in any conflict? Is that what I'm hearing? With current board rule and processes, Deb?
So I think that resolves the consistency issue with 4A and 419. I think then the question is, kind of looking at recent events, and like I mentioned, the concern that we even received today, is it okay for an ESP to say, I have a group of students and I'm going to, pick your word, assign or gift them to an LEA, and you stand to make a significant amount of money because I'm willing to assign you these students? Is that okay? And I think that's a policy decision. But yes, I think it resolves the consistency issue.
Conflict.
Thank you. Angie, go ahead.
So just for context, when we received some feedback from others this week about the word assign versus refer or referral, because I've heard some providers say that what they feel like they're doing is referring, but then the LEA is the one who's actually enrolling and registering. So I wonder if in the case you were just providing, still, even if, and I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing, but let's say that a third-party provider had identified a group of students that could be enrolled in the LEA. At some point, because of this language the way it is now, even if that entity said we have this group of students, it would seem that the students in the LEA would have to communicate because of their registration and enrollment. And so that's my question is there something there that would then be fixed by the registration and enrollment language?
So Chair, if I may, so my question to that is, and with the word assign, I guess I think enroll and register are the official terms. And so it's good to leave that with the LEA. With other words, as far as gift or assign or something like that, again, going back to, if you're referring, is it, well, what if an educational service provider, a third party, has a contractual relationship with 5 different LEAs, and those contracts could be different, right? And the funding that the ESP receives from the contract could be different. So if they're assigning for a school to an LEA, then it could be very lucrative for them to assign the student, which would be different from them possibly saying, we have relationships with 5 different LEAs. Parent, you can go pick which of these 5 LEAs you would like your student to go to. So that's kind of the difference I see is if you're assigning and there's a contractual relationship, then maybe, it stands that the ESP, there would be a certain amount of benefit for them, which maybe that's completely fine. But referral would be, yeah, we have these relationships. You go pick, and this is how you would enroll, with them, go talk to the LEA about it and go from there. In either case, receiving the services that are being provided by the education service provider. So anyway, that's kind of how I perceive that.
But again, this would be under the direction of the LEA who has contracted, right? This would not be a secret to the LEA.
Not to the LEA.
Right.
But
and so
know about other LEAs, I guess I shouldn't.
You're
I think the LEA that has the contract, they know what they're doing, but do they know what other LEAs are doing? And if other LEAs have contracts with that provider as well, and that those contracts could be different. And so funding looks different based on how they contract. And our audit showed, and I think a current audit in process is reflecting that there are big concerns with contracts actually, but yes.
Carol.
My question is related, but a little different. And if we just, for instance, had an ESP provider here to maybe wonder if this might be something that the ESPs are aware of. Let's just take one item of enrollment, which might be the birth certificate. And my concern is that having had the first discussion of the day, which started with how precious our students' data are, and how important it is to keep those private, that we're now letting ESPs look at student birth certificates. So we hope they have the same protections that LEAs, which are told not to maintain that birth certificate, but only to verify and make sure it's literally maintain the document, but only to verify that yes, the student's that age and is the child of certain parents. So we're letting that go through a business now, and granted, FERPA has an exception for providers that do the same thing that a school might do. Not, again, I'm stating that loosely, but we are loosening up our data protection, just looking at the very single item? And do we know that the ESP understands that A, it has to look for a birth certificate, or it can look for other reliable proof, and what that other reliable proof might be, and then somehow give that information to the LEA so it's part of the student's record? That's what concerns me about an LEA assigning a student, because all of that would presumably have to be done and then given to the LEA in a very secure fashion so that it becomes part of the student record. So I'm concerned, given our very first discussion of the day, how sacred student records are, even de-identified. These are not de-identified. These are going to be in some system of an ESP before they get to the LEA. So, and there could be 500, there could be 5. And that concerns me, which is why I like the idea of enrollment having to take place directly with the school that has the direct understanding of all these elements of registration, as well as FERPA. So I don't really have a solution. I'm just expressing my concerns, especially given the concern that was expressed by two committee members earlier this morning.
Thank you, Carol. From what I understand, the assigning would be, it wouldn't be diving into that registration data. It would be like reaching out to a parent, referring a parent to an LEA. I don't know if
Sorry, Matt,
Go
because
ahead.
refer in my mind is then the parent, whether again 5 or 25, then the parent can go to the LEA and go through the process, versus assign to me says that the ESP does the work and somehow gets that information to the LEA. And maybe that's my own connotation, but refer to me is a better word, which expresses the direct relationship between LEA and student and parents, and protection of that very sacred student data, of which a birth certificate is just one element.
Any other thought? I can't tell if Leanne has a hand up or not, but any other thoughts from the committee? Carol, go ahead.
And I amend the amendment to say, may not, so you proposed
So there's
may not enroll or register a student at an LEA.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? Does that mean assignment is okay in your mind?
yes. So the assignment, so yes, the assignment would be okay, but the assignment is
Even
the
though-
same thing as refer, from what I understand of the ESP.
I guess that's what I'm confused about. What does it mean for an ESP to assign a student? Because they don't have the right to assign. Only a parent has the right to enroll. What's the difference between enrollment and assignment?
Well, that's from my understanding, and Angie just said it here. I don't, an education service provider couldn't just without the parent's permission say, oh, you're a part of this school now.
Well, certainly. But if we say an education service provider may not enroll or register a student, why are we even discussing assignment? Because if they can't enroll or register a student, then by default, they can't assign. They could tell a parent that this is where their programs are available, which I guess is referring. But I think I've gotten all mixed up in the language now.
No, you said, Molly actually said that a lot better. That's what I would assume. Whereas when I said, well, then assigning is okay, you said, yes, it is. But I think the answer is no, it's not, because it is not the direct.
Well, how do we give the authority, I guess, then to say that an ESP could refer?
I don't think that, oh gosh, how do I say this? I think that happens naturally and you can't make a policy around that. I could tell my neighbor that Skyline has a wonderful program, which they do, by the way. And their student, they should look at their program. I could say Hillcrest High has a great IB program. You should look into it. And these are some advantages. I don't think we can legislate referrals.
Well, and I guess I would say that by not including it and may not, then that it would be okay.
Well, that's what, so if we had the may not, then we would not want to put.
That's right.
We would just say as it is, that the committee amend draft line or draft 1, line 80 to read, an education service provider may not enroll or register a student at an LEA.
Yeah. And I just had to work through it.
Okay.
Because I do differentiate between assign and refer and think that assign to me suggests that the ESP has control of the students. Refer to me suggests that they're recommending, and it's a business. You know, Angie can't tell somebody who she thinks the best, or she shouldn't tell those who she thinks the best school is, but a private provider can do whatever. So I think it obviously could. So I like your amendment.
So
and
can I ask a question?
Oh, sure.
Can I ask a question? Sorry. So clarify who owns the student in the end? Does the LEA own the student or does the ESP own the student?
The student owns the student. It's a politically charged question here, Leanne.
Sorry.
Remember that the LEA,
student, yes.
Yeah, remember that the LEA is always responsible for their student. They are not selling, if we're talking about owning, they're not selling the student or passing the student along.
Heaven forbid it's data.
Yeah, so does that answer your question?
So an LEA, the student is at the LEA, we'll put that more politically correctly. So a student is with an LEA, then who directs the choice of the ESP provider? Is that parent driven or is that LEA driven?
Deb.
For the use of the ESP.
So thinking about order of process, I think there's a couple of different scenarios you could consider. You could consider there is a student in an LEA, and the LEA has various schools and programs within that school. And some of those programs are based on contracts that the school or LEA has with an education service provider. And so at that point, the LEA could say, we have these programs, you could participate. And so they could help the student participate in that program. So that's one scenario. Another scenario is you have a parent and a student and they're looking for educational options and they come across a provider and the provider, as we said, maybe says, well, we have contracts with various LEAs. So if you want to participate in our program, go to this LEA and get enrolled. And then similarly, there's still a contract. And so the LEA would say, oh, you'd like to participate in this program. And we have a contractual, relationship. So you could participate. So I think there's a place where whether the student's already enrolled at an LEA or if a student is directed to, and I guess that's the question, are they directed to enroll in an LEA so they can access a program? But there's a couple of different ways that could happen. As far as the relationship goes, there could be an existing relationship or it could be this new relationship with an LEA. And the education service provider could be, in the first scenario, oh, the student was directed to us, we didn't know them before, or you could have an ESP that's actively marketing to students that they have a program and either assigning, gifting, directing, referring, whatever the word is, right? Hey, there's options at LEAs, and that would be to tap into state dollars and resources there. So I think those are a couple of ways that a student accesses a program and the relationship of the LEA and ESP.
Thank you. Does that question?
Just a follow up, if we remove the assign, how does that play with when someone says we want to gift an ownership to someone that I'm trying to clarify whether I agree with your motion or not, because the earlier conversation concerned me that they could have specific contracts with a school or with an LEA, and of course they would want to. An ESP would say, "Well, go to this one because I have a better contract with them than I do over here." If the programs were the same in both LEAs, why would they not choose the contract that better helps that ESP? So but that second explanation we just got tells me that couldn't happen, that it would be more of a, here's where you could go as long as we can make sure that the LEA is owning everything initially. Does that make sense? I'm confused between the two different scenarios.
Should I take
Please.
one more attempt?
Yeah.
So I think if there's an education service provider, an ESP, that has a relationship with a parent and a student, and they're looking for educational options, and that ESP has relationships with multiple LEAs, maybe a couple of districts and a charter, and that ESP says, okay, student A, you are assigned to a district, right? Like, you're going to this district. And it's go, you're assigned, so go enroll, right? So that could be an assignment. The other scenario is, okay, I'm a student and parent with an ESP, and they say, I have a relationship, a contract with 2 districts and a charter. You pick which LEA you want to go to. So it's that, are you saying, does the ESP get to say, and is assign the right word? Again, I'm not sure the right word, but if the ESP gets to say, student A, you must go to this district 1, that would be assignment. But if the ESP says, you could pick any of these 3 that I have a relationship with, that would be, it could be refer, right? Again, maybe we're parsing words, but there's a choice in that second one that there maybe isn't if a student is assigned by an ESP to an LEA.
So I guess for me, I would see assign and refer very differently. And so that's where I do have a concern with removing.
You're saying that too.
The assign.
Yeah.
Could they, I mean, if I'm hearing Leanne correctly, I don't think there's a way to force a student to go to a specific LEA because they can't enroll or register, right? So when you say assign, it's by nature a referral, because according to this, they wouldn't have the authority to say you are now part of this LEA. Is that correct?
So I think it is correct in so far as does the student and parent also have some kind of, what is the relationship between the student and parent and ESP? Did they sign something that says the ESP is going to tell you, go to LEA 1, and we have a signed contract saying you will do that? And if you do, then maybe it is a little bit more like assignment. If such an agreement doesn't exist, then you're right. A parent, even if they were assigned, right? It's
right.
No, I will choose where
Yeah.
my student's
that's
going
That
to
would be
go
a
and
contract
participate.
between the parent and the.
But it's also probably in violation of the law. So
I don't know.
So parent, I guess there could be that kind of a contract, but it would be what I would call an adhesion contract. I mean,
you know more about that than I do.
Well, but I would say that's not a legal agreement, and that the law would, which is the rule, would trump the contract. But that's a legal analysis for some attorney that represents the ESP and maybe the school district. But we're excluding the words assign or refer, which I think leaves that an open discussion, which usually I wouldn't like, but I prefer in this case. Because we're clearly saying you may not do these 2 things. How you do the other 2 things has to be consistent with these 2 things. Essentially is what I'm thinking it says. So with that, can we move your amendment?
Yeah, the motion before the committee is that the committee amend draft 1 line 80 to read, an education service provider may not enroll or register a student at an LEA. Member Lear. Member Hart.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
And I'm a yes, that passes unanimously. So that's the only motion on the floor. It would bring us back to the overall rule. Do we have a motion or questions? Carol?
I'll make the motion because I feel comfortable with this. I'm sure others will not. So this discussion is not over, I'm sure. I appreciate the protections built for LEAs that have been built in by staff with Debbie's consultation from Deputy Superintendent Scott, from, you know, all others. So I want to say that I think this is strong. I'm in a kind of negative mood. I've been saying it's not going to stay that way, but with the spirit of optimism in my heart, I move that the committee pass R27. I'll read the motion. The committee continue and approve R277115 draft 1 as amended on first reading forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee continue and approve R277-115 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. Member Hart.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
Member Lear.
Yes.
And I'm a yes, that passes unanimously. Thank you for those involved. Deb, thank you. This brings us to agenda item 2.8. We have about 32 minutes remaining, but we still have some potentially heavy items here. So we'll keep moving forward. 2.8 is R277-323 Public Educator Evaluation. And we have Ben to tee us up here.
Thank you, Chair. So these next three agenda items all play together. What is anticipated is that if the committee chooses to adopt the new R277-328, the evaluation rule, 531 and 533 would be repealed. This is an issue that we brought before the board several months ago, and the board at that time ultimately chose not to take action and adopt the new system. There's been some legislation since that time, and staff has been working with stakeholders to tune up the proposal and make it better for you. A couple things I would highlight. First off, just at the very end, you see that the implementation timeframe for this rule, most of the rule, it takes effect immediately, but there are sections that the LEAs have 5 years to implement, and those are highlighted there. That's consistent with the legislation, so the LEAs have time to do that. Draft 2 is the draft that we were recommending. I think, I'm just trying to remember, I think there was just a couple of small wording changes in that, and you can see those in blue and red as you look at the rule. Julie Lundell is the staff person here that's able to answer your questions. She's been leading the current revisions to this proposal, so we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. And thank you for being here, Julie. Any questions from committee?
I have it.
Carol, go ahead.
Lines 24 and 25. I'm interested in academic growth means demonstration of student learning through only the formative assessment measure. Is that, why would that be the case? Not growth being measured by a summative measurement. Matt's not here, so I can just.
Thank you, Julie Lundell, this USB specialist over teacher evaluation. And Member Lear, this line here, the reason it says formative is specifically in code, it prevents using end-of-level testing. And so it directs the LEAs to choose another form of assessment measures, and that would be other than end-of-level testing.
And I thought if it's okay to follow up with Julie. I thought that we couldn't use them for the student's grade, but to quantify or determine growth, we also can't use a summative assessment.
It's so in the code around teacher evaluation, it is specifically itemized that we can't use end of level testing in a teacher evaluation. And
Right.
so other forms of assessment could be used that are not single point in time like that, such as PLC data, or, that it leaves it to the LEA to determine which assessment measures best fit their environment, but we are specifically prohibited from using end of level testing for teacher evaluation.
Right, but I guess I just don't see growth as in teacher evaluation. I see them differently. Do you see what I'm saying?
Student growth
Right.
Can you rephrase that for me?
Well, I'm just saying, it seems like academic growth is different for a student, is different than using than using it to grade a teacher. Molly's maybe gonna help
Molly,
me.
go ahead.
Stumbling
Yeah,
on my words.
I understand both sides of this. I think the reason, you can't, yes, it is different, but it is a measure, it's a snapshot, and it's not, the notion is that standardized tests at all, data that comes, whether it's growth or achievement, can't be used because there are things that are not under the control of the educator. And so, you have half your class opt out, suddenly your growth, is very different. You move to a new grade and parents don't know you yet and they choose another teacher, and there go your growth scores. You are doing a combined class. So the point is that, yes, growth is different, but if you're going to use growth, you're going to have to use something other than the RISE or the standardized testing to determine that growth.
And I guess there's still a little bit of a disconnect in my head, but that's all right. I'm going to just trust you guys that you know what you're talking about better than I do. I just had one more question, or maybe two more. Line 138, and this is more just a grammatical thing. Sorry, I would have told you about this sooner, Angie, or whoever's in charge. But 138, give the evaluator an opportunity to demonstrate how his abilities, leaving out the there. That's not a big deal. That can just be a non-sub change. And then my last question was on line 197. Which is, I'm unclear what this means. On line 1, the superintendent shall annually monitor 10% of school district educator evaluation systems. Do we mean, this makes a little more sense than it did to me last night. I can't imagine. Do we mean, it made more sense to me to monitor 10% of school district educator evaluations, but you're really saying that we only would monitor, we'd look at, say there are 41 districts, so every year you'd look at 4. Is that what, Matt, is it okay if I ask you?
Yes. Yes. So currently there is an auditing process that goes on from USBE where we reach out, and I believe the percentage is 25%, or I can't remember the exact, and just ask them how their system's running and check and see how it's aligning with current code and rule. So this is, and we had a lot of reporting requirements previously that have been removed by recent legislation.
So you really do mean the whole system?
Yes, so this is just
not
kind
their
of,
evaluation?
no, not, because that requirement has been removed from legislation. So this would just be, and it could be every 10 years at a 10% rate, that there's a check-in from USBE that says, how is your system running? How is it aligning? And there would be recommendations given back from USBE as if there was something that didn't seem quite in alignment or that they needed to adjust. So it'd be kind of just a recommendation process.
Gotcha. And thank you. It did make more sense now when I read it this morning than last night. One more comment. Again, this is similar to my earlier comment. It's unfortunate that this only applies to school districts. I think that I think it would be really nice if we had an evaluation system that applied to all LEAs, especially when we've got a licensing system that now takes in all LEAs. And it would be really helpful to be able to make sure that again, 120 LEAs had systems that we felt were robust and meaningful. And it's unfortunate that it only applies to a very small number of our LEAs.
Thank you, Member Lear. Any other comments, or we accept a motion if the committee is willing?
Just one quick question. How will we compare teachers across the state with these individual unique school district evaluation systems? Will there be a way to compare how our teachers are doing across the state? Or will we only be able to look at it individually, district by district?
So your question, it was a little garbled, but I believe you're wanting to know if we're able to compare teachers across the state or just systems across the state. Is that the correct question?
Yes, sorry.
So with the change in reporting requirements, we would not be able at a USBE level to compare teachers across the state. That would be data within an LEA. We would be looking at the robustness of individual systems and are they aligning with the code and the rule. But what was found and what the reason why the legislation did change was that data had been collected for 12 or 15 years and had never been used in all of that time. And so that was why the legislation was requested and passed that reporting piece be removed.
Chair, may I add? Please. I want to clarify a point. It's not that it wasn't used. When it went to be used, we noted how people evaluated was inconsistent across the system. And so in some communities, they gave almost all teachers 4s. In other communities, rarely was a 4 given. And it really came down to how their system contributed to an overall score value. And so in some communities, you might have 90% in the 4 category, and another community, you might have 5. And it wasn't because they didn't have highly effective educators. It was how they, like such a range of highly effective educators, it was how they calculated it. So we could not find consistent value in the data we were receiving to be able to say, oh, we have a lot more effective teachers here in this community than this community, or let's go talk to those 4s because 4s did not mean the same thing in each community.
Okay.
I just want to clarify something. Oh, Molly's, and I'll just make this quick. I just wanted to clarify something I just said. I recognize that there's a law that requires charters to have an evaluation system, but it is not the same. And there's no provision for it to be monitored or checked upon by USBE. So even this is a way spread out monitoring opportunity for 41 school districts. I think it would be more consistent with good teachers and good monitoring to be able to monitor all LEAs similarly.
Thank you. Member Hart?
2 things, and then I'll make a motion. One, just to just say a word to Carol, your Member Lear, your concern. Staff, Ms. Lindell did present to charters and got a very, very warm reception, in my opinion. And there are many charters that will choose to use this system because it's a well-designed, well, we're not talking about the actual system yet, but there is use of USB materials by charters, just so you know that point. The other point is when we are talking about overall teacher effectiveness, when it gets to the state level, it's more about how our students are performing than it is about how teachers are teaching. So at the end of the day, there's an interesting philosophical question. Do we measure teaching or do we measure learning, which by extension implicates the teaching? So, you know, I do understand why that data might be interesting, but at the same time, I think it could be misleading because there are so many cultural, community, I don't know, differences in the application of teacher evaluation rules and guidelines. But those are just two of my thoughts that I had. It doesn't really make a difference. So I'd like to make a motion. Chair?
Okay.
Chair? That the committee approve R277-323 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on final.
Can we get draft 2?
Oh, draft 2.
We're looking at
Okay.
draft 2, yeah.
Okay. That the committee approve R277-323 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Hart. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-323 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion of that motion? Seeing none, Member Lear,
Yes.
Member Hart,
Yes.
Member Wood,
Yes.
and Member Hymas is a yes. That passes unanimously. This brings us to agenda item 2.9 and 2.10. Since these are both repeals that have been rolled into 323, I'm going to combine these if that's okay. And I'll first let Ben, I'll turn time over to Ben to discuss what's happening, and then I'll make a motion briefly afterwards. But 2.9 is R277-531, Public Educator Evaluation Requirements. 2.10 is R277-533, Educator Evaluation Systems. Ben?
So given the committee's adoption of R277-323, R277, 531 and 533 are now obsolete. And so a motion to repeal both of those rules would be in order.
So here's the shot you see on TV, Josh, for they
Thank you.
sit up here on this
Leanne, you are unmuted, just so you know. I move that the committee repeal R277-531 and R277-533 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rules on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none. Member Hart? Yes. Member Wood?
Yes.
And Member Lear?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That passes unanimously. That brings us to agenda item 2.11, Utah Adult Education Policy and Procedures Guide. And this is going to be teed up by Angie Stallings.
Yes, so thank you. Just quickly, the document that is first you're going to take action on, Stephanie Patton is here to describe the differences and changes that are in that document. But just as a reminder, once you take action on this document, that the document will be incorporated by reference into the next one. So Chair, if you would turn the time over to Ms. Patton, she can share the differences in the documents.
Stephanie, please.
Stephanie Patton, Adult Education Coordinator. So there's quite a few like minor differences in Section 3 program design. There's a couple of clarifications about adult education personnel evaluation and access to GED manager. Those are very minor, just adding clarification. The major changes actually occur in section 4 assessment, where adult education programs are required federally to use National Reporting System assessments, and those have changed. And so we're adding the additional approved NRS assessments. In section 5, financial management, we also updated some items that are surrounding retention requirements for fee waivers. And in addition, the Office of Career Technical and Adult Education recently released some guidance surrounding utilizing federal funds for child care and child and dependent care and transportation. So we added some guidance in there and a limit on how much of those the total allocation can be spent on those funds. And then data management, also some additional retention, records retention clarifications, and Section 8 distance learning updated some language because we have a new student information system.
Thank you. Any questions regarding the manual from committee members? Member Lear?
This was a lot to take in, and I did skim it and try to find the areas that you'd changed. But I wanted to say just a thank you for making the sections searchable, getting to the sections easily, for making it so you could click on the sections and get to them. That's a silly thing, but it made it easier for me to review. So thank you for that. And with that, I'm willing to make a motion if you would like to.
Sure.
I move that the committee approves the Utah Adult Education Policy and Procedures Guide, Draft 1, which is incorporated by reference in R277-733, and forward it to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the Utah Adult Education Policy and Procedures Guide, Draft 1, incorporated by reference in R277-733, and forward to the board for approval. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, let's vote. Member Wood?
Yes.
Member Lear?
Yes.
Member Hart?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That passes unanimously. Thank you. We move on to agenda item 2.12, R277-733, Adult Education Programs. And Angie will.
Yeah, thank you. Just the first thing that's changed in this rule first has been categorized as a Category 4 program. And then there were 2 defined terms that we eliminated, either due to their non-usage in the rule, or in the case of FERPA, it's already defined in R277-100. The 2 substantive changes in the rule, in addition to, of course, it will incorporate by reference the guide that you just approved, but the 2 others are the defined term of eligible provider, to allow for a charter school to explicitly participate in the state portion or receive state adult education funds. Previously, there was a question about whether only districts could participate, and there was recently a charter school that wanted to, and so this defined term of eligible provider will now explicitly allow for state purposes both a school district or a charter school, either a school district or charter school, to participate. It's voluntary. They're not required to, but they would have to meet all the other requirements of the program, but if they wanted to, they could apply. And then the other change was the elimination of that Utopia reference. As Stephanie mentioned, we are not using that system anymore, so we've eliminated references and instead are referring to the board system in general. Those are the only changes.
Okay. Committee questions? I'm not seeing any. Please.
I move that the committee approve R277-733 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The Motion on the floor is that the committee approve R277-733 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, let's vote. Member Lear,
Yes.
Member Hart,
Yes.
Member Wood,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. That brings us to our final agenda item. Agenda item 2.13, R277-929, State Council on Military Children. Ben Rasmussen is going to take this one.
Thank you, Chair Hymas and committee. So for our last item, this rule, we'd like to update some of the requirements in the Purple Star School program. This is currently the 4th year that the program is going now. We just finished our application window, and we had nearly 50 applications this year, which was really great. A number of those in this case were renewals, because heretofore the rule has stated that schools had to renew their Purple Star status every 3 years. In talking to the stakeholders that we've been working with and reviewing the applications, there was considerable discussion, and their feeling was that rather than doing renewal every 3 years, that the recognition should be kind of ongoing, but that there should be an annual, just kind of a report to maintain the status. The intention is that this would not be as long as the renewal application, but would hopefully be more kind of just a short update to make sure schools are keeping up with the requirements. And so the recommendation in this case does update one of the requirements to get the Purple Star status, and then it takes away the renewal rule and just makes it so that these schools file an annual report with staff here. We'll say that the stakeholders involved in that decision we had 3 school districts and a couple of charter schools that were on the committee that all supported that recommendation. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the program. And that's the changes in the rule.
Thank you, Ben. Can I just ask, I know I brought this up before as well, line 86 and 87.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, I guess for clarity, before I even get there, the addition is that the school shall coordinate with the school or with the school liaison program from Hill Air Force Base or Dugway Proving Grounds.
That's the change on line 73.
73. I'm just making sure I'm clear. I want to make that clear. That's the additional.
That's the update to the requirement. There was some misunderstanding about how that worked. In actuality, hardly any of the schools that apply for this program have used that particular piece, but there have been a couple that have applied and have misunderstood what was the expectation there. And so the feeling from our school liaisons was that would make it clearer and be better for the schools to understand.
And these bases, or Hill Air Force Base and Dugway Proving Grounds, they have liaisons.
Those are where you find the 2 school liaison offices in Utah. Yes.
So let's jump to 86 and 87. I apologize for the confusion on that. Every year, this program is growing. I mean, you and your team have done a great job of getting this out there. I think it's a fantastic program. We're changing now to submit an annual report. What kind of, I let my thoughts known. I'd rather do it every other year as an LEA participating in this, but it's the voice of others say every year is fine. What does this do to your staff as you continue to get more and more? It would putting people on a rotation basis, and here I am with my own selfish, intent here.
The staff that works on this is me. So, but I have had the help. I have had the help of a great committee this year. That like I said, 3 representatives from Weber, Ogden, and Davis School District have helped. We've had input from some charter schools. We've had representatives from Hill Air Force Base also helping review these, and so and the Department of Veterans and Military Affairs is our partner in this, and they've indicated that to the extent we need administrative staff help to review these applications in the future, they would help there. So I think we'll be able to manage it with current resources.
All right. You let me know when you want to go to every other.
Kind of a follow-up to that.
Please,
just
Carol.
and I make it short. Is the form, how many pages is the form? Is it pretty simple?
I anticipate it being just a few questions. Just what date did you do your training on? What date did you do your events? You know,
How
update a
many,
couple of
maybe
things.
how many participants do you have? Those
Yeah,
kinds of things.
it's not
Okay.
going to be a long form.
I just would hope that form annually stays really minimal.
That's the intent.
Agreed. Thank you, Carol. Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and put a motion forward. I move that the committee approves R277-929 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that? Seeing none, Member Hart? Yes. Okay. Member Lear?
Yes.
And Member Wood?
Yes.
And Member Hymas is a yes. That passes unanimously. So that completes our agenda. I'm going to take just a second to thank our committee for doing the work. This is a heavy and a full agenda. We got through it with a couple minutes to spare. I truly appreciate the work that goes on before we get here. So thank you in helping to run an efficient meeting. So appreciate it. And thank you, staff, for being prepared and answering all of our questions. With that, we are going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
He's been there.
I am here, Leanne.
Will you give me a call at your convenience in the next few minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everyone.